Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. Just what is it about our feelings that we do not want to feel? Could it be that feelings remind us of our imperfections? Maybe the fact that we do not have everything under control, even ourselves. And despite our most glorious efforts, you and I are just incapable of managing everything all the time. Personally, I learned slowly and over a period of years that I had been taught a variety of rules about my feelings. And few of those rules, if any of them, were ever communicated directly. They were taught by what I learned, what I picked up from my family, from my friends, from different communities like churches or teachers, from where and when I even grew up. It's not that I was taught how to feel, but I was definitely taught what's okay and what's not okay in terms of what I was to think about those feelings, and certainly whether or not it was okay to show or share them. My guest today is Greg Cochran, and like me, some of his experiences, especially some of his early experiences, led him to wander away and even more directly leave some of those ingrained teachings about feelings, about faith, about what was right and what was wrong. In our conversation, he gives voice to a painful belief that he once held, and one that I know I did and think too many of us carry for far too long. This idea that in the eyes of God, we will never measure up. We will never get it right, as if there even is a right or perfect way that you and I are supposed to be. The truth is, as Greg shares, we are to welcome all of it. And he pulled that from a poem I didn't know, but now thankfully I do, called The Guest House by Rumi. Here's just the start of it. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. That's not always easy, I know. I think this conversation supports us, certainly supported me, in growing more comfortable with welcoming all of it. At one point, Greg says, at the depth of all of us, there is this desire to move towards a wholeness, however we name that wholeness. Yes and yes. Greg Cochran is a contemplative, a writer, a spiritual director. He's also an ordained Baptist pastor and executive director at Well for the Journey in Towson, Maryland. I am so grateful he took time with me for this conversation, and I hope we all find encouragement for what he and I refer to as the deconstruction and reconstruction that all of us have to do when we examine, when we take apart and then put back together our ways of being human, especially if we're human beings that want to think a little bit more about what we're feeling as we grow. I hope you enjoy Greg's spirit, wisdom, and ease as much as I did. And so with that, let's get to this conversation. Hi there, Greg Cochran.
Hi, Ariane. How are you?
I am doing really well, and I'm delighted to get to spend this time with you today.
Oh, that's good for me too. Always is every time we talk.
Oh, that's nice. And that's a really lovely way of being. I will say that you have. I first met you as program director. Was it program director then of Well for the Journey?
I was on the board at Well for the Journey, and not probably on the program circle as committees, but circle.
And I'll probably get to a place in the conversation to ask you to say more about Well for the Journey. Sure. And I will certainly have information in show notes, but any Baltimore natives, and now even outside of Baltimore, thanks to Zoom, Baltimore natives, especially those of us in Towson, know Well for the Journey for being almost a place where people can do faith formation and personal growth formation things, and yet it is not a church.
That's correct. And I give thanks to you for you also offering your gifts in spirit as a facilitator, especially along the Brene Brown track for the Journey. So thank you.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, it's really been a place where I have curated and cultivated and learned the craft of facilitating Daring Way. So that's been wonderful. So that's enough about me. I am here to learn more about you. And I wanted to start, I'm surprised by how easily I've fallen into this pattern, which makes me think there's a reason for it, of asking people to tell me something about their call into ministry, being broader than ordained ministry, although you are ordained a Baptist pastor. So I'm going to leave it at that and invite you to start where you start.
Okay, sure. Well, yes, Baptist. I grew up in South Carolina in a small town, and in the Southern Baptist tradition, although I would no longer call myself Southern Baptist, but I was one of those that was at church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. My family eventually at one point were the custodians of the church. So I took that up, was there during the week. So I was at church about all the time, it seemed like. So faith and church were primary, just my second family growing up. So I always had that sense of wanting and desiring to follow God and in our tradition through the way of Jesus. But I would also say that I was a very sensitive child. I was the middle child, so always had my radar up.
Yeah, you middle children, you're sensitive.
Yeah, exactly.
Sensitive mediators.
That's exactly right. Peacekeeping. So I always had my radar up. So I was always a sensitive child, and so I took very seriously what I heard at church and what now I call them preachers. I would not call them pastors because they were more preachers than pastors.
Because why?
In the tradition that I grew up in, it was more informal, not as much emphasis placed on education. So it was really about the preacher did pastoral care for sure, but the main goal was preaching on Sunday morning and preaching the word of God and saving souls.
There's a lot of coded language in there that we can unpack maybe, but I'm going to want you to keep going.
Exactly. A lot. And so, I mean, so I tried to really live what I was heard, and I could never do it right. It seemed like I could never get it right, but I still took it in very deeply, and that stayed with me. And helping people was very important to me. Maybe that goes along with the middle child, making sure everything's okay, but that was always important. So as I got older, that stayed with me. Kind of a side or parallel track along with that is that nature was very important to me, being out in nature. So I always, and I've come to be able to say that the woods were my real sanctuary in a way, the creation and nature. So I had that alongside me as well. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
Well, before we entirely leave that portion, there were two phrases you said, and I want to know how they're connected. You said church and this desire to follow God.
Yes.
And then you also talked about never quite getting it right.
Yeah, good. Right. So, and I think this will lead into later discussions too. So, and maybe that's something that I was talking about when I said this parallel track or path, I sensed the way I knew how to sense God within me uh, as a young child. I was intuitive, but my faith tradition was all about motion and action, going out. You're saved now, so you go out and save others. It was quiet. Stillness was not incorporated into any of our services or teaching or anything. But I had that part of me, and I think that's why nature was a sanctuary for me, because that was quiet. And I love the title of this podcast, Feeling Beings That Think, because it was in the woods where I could be that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, in my tradition and in my family, feelings were not primary. Experience was looked down on. You follow the word of God, and that's what your measurement is. And so I can never measure up to that.
It's so interesting, because in that context, the word of God is always outside of you.
That's correct. That's right. The verse, "Be perfect as I am perfect."
Matthew.
That got me every time. I didn't like
stupid English. That English destroys the Greek every time.
Exactly.
So let's just let everybody know, so we're all on the same page. Be whole as your Father is whole.
Exactly. Yeah. Be whole, be complete. And therefore, imperfection is incorporated into that.
Right.
A part of it that
it's necessary.
It is necessary, very necessary. So yes, for sure. So there was an experience when I was 19 that kind of was that turned everything. I was a junior at Clemson University in South Carolina, and was working with my uncle that summer, putting in sprinkler systems in warehouses, new construction, all of that, just putting in sprinkler system. I was toward the middle of the summer, we were working in a warehouse where we were having to put up sprinkler pipes about 25 to 30 feet up in the air. And we were in this cherry picker thing. And my uncle made a decision and told the driver of the cherry picker that he thought we could go over to the next bay where we were putting up the next pipe without letting the cherry picker down, going under the beam and then going up. So as we were going under this one, he got caught. He leaned over the cherry picker railing, and I squatted down.
Wow.
In the cherry picker, and he was crushed, and he died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that blew my theology out of the water.
You were 19.
I was 19.
How old was he?
He was 41.
Oh.
So he was an uncle that, talking about imperfection, he was one that let me make mistakes and still, like, instead of going, "Oh, can't you do that right?" He taught me, okay, so this is the way you do it. So he was one of my favorite uncles. And then this happened to him. He's a good person. And then this happened to him, and it didn't fit into the theology I was taught. If you're good, things are going to happen good to you. And if you're bad, you're going to get zapped. And so this didn't fit at all. And so questions started coming. But in my tradition, again, you don't question authority. You don't question God. I had questions.
Yeah.
And also, like I said before, feelings were something you didn't talk about very much. And especially anger was not okay.
Right.
And then especially anger at authority was not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry and I had questions. And I tried to stick with my tradition and what I was taught for the next year, but my I don't remember much of that year.
Yeah.
And I have a pretty good memory about childhood memories and things. I don't remember that much that of that year. Uh,
That's
I thought,
I just I want to
yeah,
stop you on that because that's a
sure.
monumental event. And I am no longer surprised when both myself and people I know in their own personal experiences of having to incorporate and integrate the reality of a person's death in their life don't remember things, and
Yeah,
time
yeah,
completely
exactly.
so changes. Were you even, when you look back on it now, were you able to grieve at all as a 19-year-old, or did you not?
But at that moment, no. What I remember is presence. What I remember most is people being with me.
Hmm.
Not so much what was said, but my best friend who was in high school, but now we stayed friends in college. I remember him coming over and said, "Greg, do you just want to take a drive?" This is when in the South, where people all come to your house and
Yeah.
have food and stuff. And I thought, yes, thank you.
Hmm.
And we just drove and just were with one another. I don't remember any words that were said.
No, that's the you just name, and I just have to say it because you mentioned before we pressed record that you had just listened to Lisa Tilstra, and
Yeah,
her podcast, Make Life Less Difficult. I just listened to a story she shared with somebody who had a horrible accident and became quadriplegic,
yeah,
and subsequently has lived a very full and amazing life. But he too talked about a nurse holding him once when he was bereft with the reality of his existence and what had changed, and no words were said.
yes.
And I just don't think we can ever lift up enough to people the value of being present to someone in a way that doesn't need words, and how incredibly vital and strengthening it is.
I would totally agree, Ariane. That yes, thank you for noting that for sure. I would agree. And that's what for me, that's what I remember about that time were people that were present. I don't remember much of what was said or people or the consolation that people were giving me. I remember presence. That was a consolation to me at the time, just letting me be in that moment. Uh, but the grieving came later uh, because I was still tied into that system, and I was starting to question that system. But that was scary in itself because that's all I had known. And when you start to break away, either from a faith that you have been taught and lived, or your family system, the way you're supposed to be in your family system, that's scary.
Yes.
So I did what I try to, I guess, went the middle ground and I ran away from home in an appropriate way. I went to seminary.
That's a very middle child way of running away from
Right?
home and finding the peace.
That's right, right. That's right. Uh, but I went to Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, which I was for some of my relatives who have Bob Jones University ties in South Carolina. They encouraged me not to go there
Mm.
because it was more liberal at the
Hmm.
time. But that was a good place to be. And my education there wasn't so much book education. Uh, for some reason, I knew it was processing what had just happened and asking questions of faith. For sure, the classroom stuff fed into this a lot, for sure. And I have my degree. I do have my
Hmm.
degree, but it was taking classes like, for example, I took a theology class from a professor who I knew had just lost his wife to cancer because I wanted to know what he was thinking.
Wow. So you were that discerning and wise even then.
Well, grace and spirit led, maybe.
But you were aware that that's one of the
Yeah,
reasons
yeah.
you chose the course.
Well, and I think that's where I started paying more attention to my intuition than to my head.
Gotcha.
Getting back to the title of your podcast here. And I took where I first remember grieving it, that incident with my uncle. I took a class. It was called. I took an anger and aggression class, a pastoral care professor, and then a human crisis class, pastoral care human crisis class, and we had to write about a significant crisis. And I remember sitting down in this chapel that was on the lower level of this building by myself and trying to write, and I just started bawling.
Yeah.
At that point, and that was good. And it's so interesting though how people were put in the path of helping me get to a place where I could move to the next step. There was in this little town that I grew up in, there was a pastor at another church, another Baptist church that I became friends with that went to Southern Seminary years before. And he suggested a pastoral counselor for me. And that's when my first time I ever started went to a pastoral counselor, any kind of counseling.
Had you known what that was?
Not really, no. And that was a tremendous help. So all of this kind of flow. I like rivers a lot.
Yeah.
So I think about this as a flow. This is flowing, and I don't know where it's going, and I don't know all of where it came from, but it's flowing. And I think that was the beginning of learning how to be in the moment, or in the now, or in the presence, however you want to say that.
Do you think that looking back, or were you aware of that at the time?
I don't think I was aware of it at the time. That was not in my vocabulary.
Gotcha.
I think that I, again, intuitively knew some of this and what would be best, but I didn't know how to name it.
Well, I mean, it seems to me if you describe yourself as an intuitive, quiet child, like sort of as your earliest state of being, and the one you felt very comfortable with, it seems to me that you are having some affirmation from the outside world and the context of your faith. That wasn't the original home congregation. That was affirming a really innate beginning part of you.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think a lot of us go to seminary and somehow discover some of that.
I think so. I would agree totally on that. And I think that was another piece for me at seminary. It was a community.
Yeah.
Because I had my church community growing up, and it was a good community. But for me, the first time I really felt like community as I was a part of, truly, and they got me and I got them. Questions were okay. Was at seminary.
I think the current phrase is find your tribe. A lot of us do find our tribe in seminary.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened afterwards?
Well, I mean, so that was part of the journey. I mean, if you want to say I had the call before I went to seminary, I said it with my mouth and I ran away from home in the appropriate way. But it was probably during seminary that I really decided the area that I wanted to focus on, and that was with children and youth. And it was because of my experience of growing up as a child. And so that's what I focused on. And I graduated from Southern and moved to Baltimore. So I've been at the same church since 1988.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know that we've had this conversation already before, but it was actually this past September 11th, I announced to the congregation that I'm going to be leaving the congregation to focus more on well for the journey here. But September 11th was the exact date that I started at the church in 1988. So
Wow, because that's the exact date I started at Church of the Good Shepherd.
are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, how
I
cool.
started on 2011.
Oh, wow.
And for both of us in different ways, I'm sure that date, because of
Yeah,
our shared
exactly.
United States connection, that was a very sadly significant day.
Exactly.
Wow, I didn't
Oh,
realize that we started on the same.
I didn't
Huh.
either. How
So were there
cool.
like audible gasps when you announced this to people you've been with for this long?
I was a little surprised. There were about 5 or 6. Finally, no, I'm just kidding. Uh, no, yeah, there was. Um, yeah, I think there were some people stunned a
We might have
bit.
to explain that joke, by the way.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there so long that people were ready to get rid of me. But not really. No one really said that. There was one boo. She's in her 80s, and
Oh,
I've known her for a long time.
yeah.
She did an audible boo. Yeah, there was some people who were stunned, but in overall, there was encouragement and good uh, tidings to me, wanting the best for me. And I think they knew that it was the time was coming. I've expressed over the last year or so, I thought that the church needed a younger person in my position that had
Hmm.
more energy. And what's important for me is uh, I try to always not move away from something, but move toward something.
Yes.
And here at the well, things are really opening up, and we're growing, and so it felt right to move toward this, not um, just the growth of the well, but also my own spiritual being too, where I am spiritually at this time.
So
So
that also makes me think of rivers, because you just said,
yeah,
rivers move towards things. You don't really think about what they're moving away from
yeah,
so
yeah,
much, and
yeah.
they're always joining something.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So you're making me think of what I had emailed you when I had talked
yeah,
about ideas I had. It amazes me when people tell me how long they've stayed in certain roles in the congregation, and I don't really think this has everything entirely to do with the fact that we work in churches. I just think we live in a world that really encourages nonstop movement. And now being a parent and seeing, having a 17-year-old about to go off to
yeah,
college,
yeah, yeah.
I so know the narrative of it's everything the child is in. You're always talking about the next thing. And I
Yes.
remember a couple of years ago was like, Mom, like, stop talking about college. Like, I'm here now. And I was like, wow, I didn't even
Yeah,
realize I was participating in it in that way. And probably personally, just because I'm on the other side of 50 now. And so maybe hopefully getting a little more grounded and comfortable with trusting that God happens no matter where you are. And we don't
yeah,
always need to move or change in order to grow. That was something I associate with you, because you have a very grounded presence. Like when you're in your presence, you're grounded. I feel grounded and it's calming. And because of conversations we've had about spiritual practices in nature,
yeah.
the spiritual practice of I don't know, what did you do with the wood when you shape
Wood,
it?
wood turning.
Wood turning. And when you
Yeah,
explained that to me one time, because you're creating something and it's not necessarily going to be perfect, and you're kind of working with an object that you need to compromise with
yeah,
and be with. So,
yeah.
so And the constantly, I mentioned to you, I read this book by Rowan Williams called Where God Happens, Discovering Christ in One Another. I read it often and I reread passages, and it's based a lot on the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers, and focuses on staying
Yes.
and being okay where you are.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of my talking now. So say some things.
No, so when you sent that email to me that had that phrase, the spirituality of staying, that really struck me. And I thought, yes. And it started, I just carried it with me, and it would visit me in the evening. And I would go, oh yeah, spirituality of staying. That's it. Because we're taught, as you were saying, we're encouraged, and the way in the Western world especially is to always to move and to go and to be in motion. And that's when we say the spirituality of staying. I wonder if people automatically go to, oh, you're in one place, physically in one place. But what as I sat with that phrase a bit more, yeah, the spirituality of staying allows me to move. It's the spirituality of staying grounded, of being in the present moment, of trusting that presence is with us all the time, trusting that that river is always flowing through me. That's the grounding.
Wow.
That's the staying. And if
Yes.
I can stay there, then that allows me to move in other ways that I would normally not move. But that's countercultural too. So
It is.
yeah, so that's what kind of, go ahead.
No, because so the title of the podcast is Feeling Beings Who Think.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to just say the quote, that we want to believe we're thinking beings who sometimes feel, but the truth is we're feeling beings who sometimes think, and not always well.
Yeah.
But, I grew up in a household where feelings were explosive and dramatic and ever present and intense. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was always the best way to live into feelings. And sometimes they were treated a little too much like facts. And I'm hearing from you growing up in a family where feelings weren't a safe place to stay.
That's right.
Right. And I think the reason why the quote resonates and comes out of this work of Brene Brown's regarding vulnerability is because certain feelings we so don't want to feel and we go straight to our head. However, we have to kind of move, we have to stay in the feeling.
Yes.
To stay there so that we can acknowledge it, be present to it, allow it to be, knowing that we're going to be on another side of it, and maybe then come back and think about it and think about why we had that feeling. And to me, that's also a lot of spirituality practice.
Yes.
Because it's been when I am sometimes most engaged, like my full attention is on my quote unquote spirituality, right? I'm in a class, like at seminary, or I'm at retreat and don't have anything scheduled and have my phone locked into a box that I can't touch. Right. Then all of a sudden you start having feelings and thoughts, and you have to wrestle with that. That Greek word the desert fathers talk about, apatheia or something. Right. That boredom.
Right.
And staying in that is incredibly challenging.
That's right. Yeah, because being in motion allows us to deflect.
Yep.
To keep from being there and to deal with ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
Or I would say presence or spirit dealing, God dealing with, not dealing, but being with us and helping us see so that we can become more whole. So yeah, for sure, I agree. When I was first started counseling back in seminary, for me, one of the main issues that I needed to be aware of is around anger, because we were taught growing up, you can't be angry. It's a sin to be angry. But yet in our household too, anger was expressed was either explosive or silent. You either got yelled at or it was a silent treatment.
Yep.
So I was able, I mean, at you, you could have asked me, in high school and early seminary, are you angry? Oh no, I don't ever get angry. And
Mm-hmm.
so that being present with, as I sat in that room with the counselor and I had to be present with the questions he was asking me, I had to recognize, oh man, I think I am angry. And then
Yeah.
it's that being more present with it, helping the awareness of when I felt anger and when I acknowledged it, that time period become less and less because
Right.
I'm so detached from that feeling uh, that I couldn't even name that I was having it, and it
Yes.
had to be closer and closer together. The experience and being and naming that and being with it maybe at the
Well,
same time. Yeah.
well, and in Brené's work, she subscribes to, and my understanding is that not all psychologists or social workers subscribe to this, but there is a primary school of thought that anger is always a secondary emotion, and
Mhm.
it's protecting us
Yeah.
from something far more painful that we have to be and stay with.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And that thing you said too about you're either angry or you're silent, that binary, which
Yeah.
comes out in all religions,
That's
and
right.
certainly in certain levels of your, I don't want to say growth. I can't stand sometimes always talking about faith as some sort of linear trajectory towards
Exactly.
perfection.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not what I mean. It's more like that Richard Rohr of you integrate and transcend and integrate and
Yeah. Yeah.
transcend. And, there's always 50 steps back before there's one step forward.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
no,
And
go ahead now, say something.
no, I was going to say that makes me think about again my transformation in spirituality and what I believe it is, or in that I have come to name myself as a contemplative,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and to me, I know for some people, contemplative may mean being quiet, meditating. For me, it's the idea that there's a conversation always going on inside of me. I
Mm-hmm.
would name it the spirit with a capital S, and my little spirit
Mm-hmm.
is always going on. And the goal is to try to listen to it more
Mm-hmm.
every day, let it become more conscious than unconscious. So I can be contemplative in a finance committee meeting because I can live out of that conversation. I can be contemplative or try to be if someone cuts me off while I'm driving.
Yeah.
How am I to do that? I can be contemplative in worship. I
Yep.
can be contemplative wherever. That
Yep.
river is always, again, that river is always flowing. Even when
And,
I'm unaware, it's always flowing.
and don't, or do you think that one of the things that changes is when we're younger or whatever time we go to seminary? I mean, I was in my 30s, I wasn't 19, very different, but we're going there because we think that's the place where we will find this contemplation. That's the place where we will find this. And then we move into this other understanding. Oh, wait, it's not, I mean, seminary is great, but it's about being that way and all in the finance meeting,
Yeah.
in all the places.
Yeah. In my tradition, I don't even think people were aware of that. That's what they may be seeking.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. I would agree with you. I think that at the depth of all of us, there's this desire to move toward a wholeness, however we name that wholeness.
Well, say something though, because when you say your tradition, you're talking about your first
Right.
Baptist, Southern
Yeah. Yeah.
Baptist, because
Yeah.
you're still Baptist. So then what's the difference there?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. That's a good question. Now I've got now another question for me to ponder. Yeah, so I think I would say Baptist is the way that I move into my understanding that has informed who I am. I think now, uh, and I attend a Baptist church. I think now my view of who I am is much broader than just a denomination.
Yeah. Say more about that, please.
Um, so part of my growth and transformation has been an opening to it's almost like I think now the fad word may be deconstruction of faith or deconstruction of faith and reconstruction. I think that's been happening to me all along the way. It just has been happening, and just being exposed to. I mean, in the Southern Baptist world, we thought that Episcopalians, your tradition, were like, oh, wow, yeah, no, we don't. They're not good, and not just Episcopalians, even a liberal Methodist church in Clemson, we weren't supposed to go to their church or anything. So then for sure, Catholics, oh, it's so funny. I did some spiritual direction training. And so I'm a spiritual director too, or spiritual guide, I like more so. But I had to have a peer group to go through that training. I went to Schilling Institute. And the only peer group I could find was with 7 sisters, nuns. So I was this Baptist boy with 7 sisters.
They
And
loved it.
I remember the first meeting we had, I walked out of there and I thought, what wisdom I just experienced. So that's part of my growth.
Yeah.
And at one point I was able to say to them, growing up, I was taught that you were going to hell. And without a beat, they said, and we were taught that you were going to hell.
Oh my God, it's so ridiculous.
Isn't it? Right?
It's so ridiculous.
So that's it, Ariane. That's it. To me, it's so ridiculous that we think that we know what is best and what is right. For sure, we get insights and we try to do the best. And I'm not judging. We try to do the best we know how to do, for sure. That's all we can do. But then we close ourselves up, I think, and we become narrow, and we get in a box. And I think you're right. Fear, that's a deeper emotion. That fear keeps us from exploring. We listen to fear. I think of Rumi's poem, The Guest House, welcoming everything, welcoming in. And so I'm trying to do that, just welcoming everything in. So I learned from the Buddhist tradition. I've so enjoyed the well that comes out of the church that you, where you're the rector, Good Shepherd. So learning more about the Episcopalian tradition, I love that. The Quakers. So I think there's so much more than what I was taught, that where we had the answer.
Gotcha. So we didn't quite get to the difference between Baptist then and Baptist now.
Okay.
But it basically, American Baptist is a much more liberal, progressive tradition.
Yeah. So yes,
and I'm moving us here, by the way, because there's something I really, really, really want to ask you before we're done.
Okay. So Southern Baptists that I grew up in, at one point, it would be okay for me to be in that tradition because they were open and women could be ordained as ministers, and you could ask questions. As I was ending seminary, there was a concerted, intentional takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention by more fundamentalists who now say, women can't be ordained. The Bible is inerrant. Every period is where it's supposed to be. So I couldn't stay there. The church where I serve now, I have been serving, is an alliance of Baptist church. It's not a denomination,
Oh,
but
okay.
and yes, more social justice minded, open and affirming the LGBTQ plus community, women ordained as ministers. So that's kind
So
of the
you're the
difference.
Episcopalians of the Baptists? Just like that's our branch in the Catholic small c?
Exactly. Yes.
Or at least the American church. Okay, so here's my question that I really want to get to before we close. You talked about shedding your denominational identity. And I understand that. However, holding on to this idea of both and not having these opposing binaries. And I'm kind of realizing this the more of these conversations I have. There is a way in which we can shed our denominational identities and shed what is quote unquote ridiculous and really make a choice to be present to one faith community.
Yes.
And that is a spirituality of staying.
Yes.
Especially, let's face it, right now, when habits are greatly changing since the pandemic. And I get it, right? I get why habits are changing. I don't know that I would come to church every day, every Sunday, if I didn't have to. However, can you say something about the both and of that for you?
Yeah. So what comes to mind is the spirituality of staying is allowing me to not stay. Is allowing me to explore a bit more. But it will also, the spirituality of staying, I believe, will also lead me back to a community, because I think community is so important. And whether that's a Baptist community, a Quaker community, I don't know, but I know that I need a physical staying as well, because I just experienced that. I mean, in a lot of different ways through my life, where community is so important. So, and like I describe, I have a first language, Baptist language, evangelical language. You may have it. You have it too. A lot of people have a first language. And then I have a second language, a contemplative kind of language. And at first I fought against my first language because, as you said before, there's a lot of baggage that can be with the first language. But through staying with it and not running away from the feelings that I had with some of the words that came up in that first language, I've come to like embrace it. And now I go, oh, I can interpret now. I can, in the spiritual guidance program, I'm on staff at Shalem for their spiritual guidance program and in a program in Idaho. And the program in Idaho has more evangelicals in it that from closer to what I grew up with. And some that come to Shalem now. And now I can go, oh, I know what you're saying.
Right.
Let me interpret what the words. So, it hasn't, that stays too. I mean, that's in me. Miss Jackson from my preschool teacher at my church in South Carolina, who gave me candy when I would sit with her. And then in high school, when I sat close to her, she gave me candy. And then when I went to college and I would come back to church, she would give me candy. And then when I went to seminary and I came back to visit, she'd give me candy. And when I moved to Baltimore and went back, she gave me candy. Constant. Constant. That's God. Constant. That stays with me. That's church that stays with me. Yeah.
it's funny, the most that idea of staying and the idea of somebody just giving you candy, right? Again, there's no words.
Right. No
They're just
word.
being with you in a familiar way, and that's very comfortable. And as somebody who also I'm almost scared to call myself a contemplative and practice contemplative practices on a regular basis, and value so much the time I can sit and set a timer and be quiet with my one word, which is what makes me want to have these intentional conversations in many words,
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. And that's the thing. We need words, though.
Right. It's that both and.
I remember the moment, it was when I was in the Shalane program, we had one of our facilitators, leaders, was a Quaker, but he was a Zen master as well. And he was talking about some of the Buddhist practices. And I was at a point where I could look out the window and I saw this tree, and it dawned on me, is like, you know what? We gave that a name. It doesn't really have a name. I mean, it's like God, like I am who I am. Because we need words.
We do. But they have their limits.
But they have their limits. And as soon as we name something, we start to limit it in a way. But we need to be able, like we're doing, and to grow and transform.
I know. And now I have to limit this conversation, which could go on a very long time. So before we close, because I want to say thank you so much for making time and for sharing a part and piece of you and your life with me and whoever listens. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And you with me. So that's how it works, right? Thank you.
It is. But before I press stop recording, tell me what's going on at Well for the Journey that you're excited about and want people to know about.
Yeah, so Well for the Journey, we name it as a safe, sacred space where people can come wherever they are on their spiritual journey to explore. We wanted people to be able to do that because that's how you grow and transform and stay, be with yourself a bit. So a lot of great programmings for coming up in the fall, both online, in person, hybrid. So people can check that out at our website, wellforthejourney.org.
And we'll have all that. We'll have links in there. And yes, even though I'm biased because I do facilitate there, the breadth of programming, I will say, this fall is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Our program director, Gordon, and program coordinator, Lori, have done a great job with that.
And I'll just go ahead and encourage other faith communities to never be afraid of sort of highlighting the work of Well for the Journey, because I don't think it ever takes away from what a church can offer. And in some ways, like we found with Good Shepherd, you can have some really fun partnership opportunities.
I would agree. We want to help add to and not take away. Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. That's the goal. I mean, we're all trying to do the same thing. We want the world to be a better place. So
we do.
Work together.
We do.
We do.
Well, thank you, Greg. You make my world a better place. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ariane. I'm honored that you would ask. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too.